When I put the payment down on my new house, the thing I was most excited about was the basement where I was going to put my washer and dryer. Anyone who has to go to a laundromat all the time will tell you that it's the dream to be able to do laundry in your own home. I never expected what I was going to find in the basement though. When I was given a tour of the house before I chose to buy it, I thought the real estate agent showed me everything, but they must not have known about the room I found on my second night in the house. I was in the basement doing laundry, and before I started the washing machine, I started hearing a weird sound. At first, it sounded like something was scratching. Then it was followed by a scraping noise as if something had rubbed up against a window. I looked around the room to see if there was any glass or window that could be making that noise, but I couldn't find anything. As the noise continued, I started to feel like I had things crawling all over me, and I was really close to freaking out until I noticed something along the basement wall. There was a small handle. It was on a section of the wall that at first glance looked like there was a crease in the wallpaper, but after taking a closer look, I could tell that it was a crack in the wall. There was a door there, a door I wish I never opened. Curiosity got the better of me though, and I figured, what's the worst thing that could be in there? Besides, I needed to know what was causing that scratching noise. I had to pull pretty hard to force the door open, and when I finally got it, there was hardly any light, so I couldn't see what was in the room behind it. I pulled out my phone, turned the flashlight on, and was surprised to find an entire room in my basement that nobody seemed to know about. I was about to walk into the room when all of a sudden on the wall, I saw what looked like a massive spider. Thankfully, it was only a shadow on the wall. Once I got a better look into the room, I realized that the shadow and the scratching noise were actually coming from a single large spider in a jar that was on one of the shelves. The spider was trying to work its way up the side of the glass, but couldn't get it. A shiver went down my spine as I walked further into the room. There was something about it that made me feel very uncomfortable, and it wasn't just the spider. As I looked around, I noticed a small desk with a cloth-covered jar on it, and next to that was a small note that was sitting on top of an ornate-looking plate. I walked over to the table and took a closer look at that jar, but was hesitant because I didn't want it to be another spider. One was enough for me. What it ended up being, though, turned out to be much worse. I slowly pulled the cloth covering off of the jar and had to stop myself from dropping it as I realized that inside the jar was what looked like a human heart. I quickly put the jar down on the table and stepped away from it. I was having a hard time catching my breath as I began to wonder what sort of house I had just bought. Then I remembered the note that was sitting on the table next to the jar. I thought about whether or not I should look at it or if I should just leave, but again, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped back toward the desk and picked up the piece of paper. My heart felt like it was about to jump out of my throat as I read the 4 words that were scribbled on the paper. It's your ritual now. I dropped the note and ran out of the room as fast as I could. I called the police to come and pick up the jar and examine the room for me, and when they did, they were just as shocked as I was. Thankfully, the heart in the jar turned out to be a pig heart, according to their analysis, and there were no signs of any actual crime committed in the basement. But for the life of me, I can't figure out what they meant by "it's your ritual." I eventually moved out of the house and was very forthcoming about the secret room to the new owners. My wife and I had just moved into a new home in North Carolina, and we couldn't have been happier with the place. That is, until we met our neighbors. You've heard of nightmare neighbors before. Well, this was the type of neighbor that you'd literally see in your worst nightmares. It all started a few days after we moved into the house. It was just after dinner time, and I was getting ready to head upstairs to get some work done on the computer when I realized that my phone charger was still in the living room. I walked over to the wall it was plugged into, which happened to be right next to one of the windows that looked out from the side of our house. As I got closer to the window, I heard the sound of someone moving around outside. I pressed my face to the glass to look outside and was startled when I noticed one of my neighbors crouched down along the side of the house. I saw him look up toward me and immediately ran to the front door to confront him, but by the time I got there, he was gone. I looked over to see which house he had come from, but I couldn't catch him in time, so there was no telling. I eventually went back inside and made sure to close all of the blinds and lock all of the windows. I explained to my wife what happened, and she suggested we call the police, but I figured that we should see if it happened again before getting 911 involved. That night, we both had a hard time sleeping, as we didn't know which one of our neighbors was trying to spy on us. Little did we know, it was about to get a lot worse before it got any better. A few days had passed since I saw that man trying to look through our windows, and I was getting home from work when I noticed something weird. The front door to the house was wide open. I ran up the porch and called in to see if my wife was home, and she called down from our bedroom that she was just getting changed. I closed the door behind me and ran up the stairs to ask her if there was any chance she left the door open, but she swore that she didn't. Not only that, but she claimed that she even locked the door when she got home because she was going to shower. I told her to stay in the bedroom and lock the door as I took a look around the house, but I never ended up finding anything. Other than the door being open, there was no sign of anyone being in the house. The two of us talked for a while about what we should do, and we ultimately decided to call the police. They came by to check out that house, but after we explained what happened, they just assumed my wife left the door open and then stopped taking the call seriously. They left, and neither one of us really knew what we should do at that point. We tried to get some sleep, but just like the first time, we both had a really hard time getting to bed. The next day turned out to be uneventful, and the same with the next few days after that. Eventually, we both sort of forgot about the incident with the door and tried to move on with our lives. That proved harder than we expected, though. A few weeks after I had come home to the door unlocked, I had to take the day off from work to get my wife's car fixed. I let her take my car to work, and I told her I would drive hers to the mechanic and have it all fixed by that afternoon. This means that whoever had been snooping around must have thought my wife was home alone, because while I was in the shower getting ready to bring the car to the shop, I heard a loud thump from downstairs. I recognized the sound of the front door swinging open and banging into my boots that I always put between the door and the wall. I got out of the shower as fast as I could and grabbed a towel before standing at the door trying to see if I could hear anything. I heard the sound of someone walking downstairs. I looked around and realized my phone was still on the bed in my bedroom, and the only way to get to it would be to walk through the hall. I slowly opened the door and made my way out into the hallway. And just as I was making it into the bedroom, I caught a glimpse of the intruder. It was the same man who was looking into our window, and he must have seen me too, because when he realized I wasn't my wife, he took off. He ran back down the stairs and out the front door before I could even grab my phone. I called the cops and then called my wife to tell her to stay at work until we could be sure it was safe. The officers determined that the man who was breaking in likely had a key, which was how he was able to get into the house both times without actually breaking anything. My wife and I knew we couldn't move out just yet, so we decided to get new locks for all of the doors, and we even sealed up the entrance through the storm cellar that we had. This ended up solving our problems, because up until the moment that we moved out, there weren't any more incidents. At least, not until the day we actually left. As I was finishing packing up the kitchen, I noticed something strange above the pantry, and when I pulled it down, I realized that it was a small camera. It seemed to be battery power, so it was probably dead for a while, but still, it's creepy to think about how we were watched in our own home without even realizing it. For all we know, that guy could have been breaking in for weeks to get footage of us for whatever sick reason. I'm just happy to be out of that house for good. When I first moved into my family's new house, I couldn't help but feel like I was never alone when I was in my room. That was a huge bummer because when we first looked at the place, I basically begged my mom and dad to let me have the big room in the attic. They originally wanted to renovate it into a home gym, but I convinced them to use the smaller room on the main floor as their gym and let me have the attic. It was a really cool space, or so I thought. It had a lot of space to it, and the best part was the really big mirror that was attached to the wall next to the closet. Or I thought that was the best part. Now it just makes me not trust mirrors when I go to some place I'm not familiar with. As I said, after we moved in, I planned to spend a lot of time in my new room, which is why it was a bummer when I realized how uncomfortable I was in that room. For some reason, whenever I sat on my bed, I felt like I was being watched by someone. But as far as I could tell, there was no one around. One time when I was just sitting on my bed listening to my MP3 player, I remember closing my eyes and then feeling like there was someone standing right next to me. My eyes sprang open and I looked to my side, and thankfully there was no one around, but I couldn't shake that uncomfortable feeling. Only now it was coming from a specific side of the room, the one with the mirror. After a while, I couldn't take the feeling of not being safe in my own room, so I started looking around that section of the wall and the mirror for anything that looked out of the ordinary, but there was nothing. That's when I turned my attention to the closet that was right next to the mirror. I decided to check the closet thoroughly, and what I found surprised me. There was a small latch in the corner that opened up a false wall that was positioned right behind the mirror. I was shocked and called my parents up to my room right away. My dad went inside the room first and called out for my mom and me to come in after him. It was a small, cramped space that hardly had enough room for the three of us to stand. But once I was inside, I realized why the mirror was so strange to me and made me feel like I was being watched. It was actually a one-way mirror that was installed by whoever owned the house before it was sold to the bank. To make things even creepier, as we were squeezing our way out of the cramped room, I stepped on something round. I looked down, and at my feet, there was a piece of torn-up rope that looked like it had some sort of dried stain on it. I pointed it out to my dad, who said it looked like dried blood, and then we immediately contacted the police to come and take it. To this day, I don't know what that room was used for before I moved in, but my parents had it sealed off shortly after we found it, and we replaced the mirror with a painting that we found at the thrift shop. As far as I know, the police never found anything on the rope, but it was better to have it checked out just in case. My biggest takeaway from that room is that I'll never feel comfortable around a mirror again.